we walked up to the sheep, they were slowly munching grass coming towards us, and we could hear this underlying crunching and munching. And there were a couple of them that were wearing the bells, so you could hear a couple ringing, and we were trying to figure out which one has the bell around its neck. There was one that looked to be lame, and so he was slowly following all the rest of them. And then to see this young boy, who barely looks like he's in his teens, was leading this flock of dozens of sheep around. And it was just really sweet to watch. It was very tender. One of the things that Luke records for us in chapter 2 is that in the region of Bethlehem, the same region that Jesus was born, that night there were some shepherds out in the field with their sheep. And as they were tending their flocks, an angel came and announced the birth of Jesus. And they celebrated and wanted to go meet him. It would have looked a lot like this. It would have been dark, there would have been the bright light. And as they rejoiced, they would have been excited to know that the Messiah had been born. Being out there on that hillside, it was so much easier to imagine the night of Jesus' birth and to imagine a dark hillside while these shepherds are putting their sheep down for the night. They're resting, it's quiet and calm, and then all of a sudden there's this angelic announcement about the birth of the Messiah, and they start worshiping and praising, and I've just got that image stuck in my head now.
And our guide actually made a great point when we were out there in the fact that because shepherds are always awake while they're working and because they see other flocks and other shepherds, that the best way during the first century to carry a message out is through the shepherds. And so maybe that was why God chose to send the angels to the shepherds first, because they would be able to spread the word, spread the good news of the birth of Jesus.
One of the things coming to Israel does is it helps put into perspective distances. I always visualize Bethlehem is just an hour's drive or 2 hours drive from Jerusalem. You know, Bethany is so far over here, the Mount of Olives was so far over here. That's not the case. So the distance just from Bethlehem to Jerusalem
Is 6 miles. 6 miles.
that's a 1 hour walk. You know, that's less than a 1 hour walk if you're jogging or really trying to get it done. And so to realize it really wasn't that far from where Joseph's family was to come to the Temple Mount. They had already traveled all the way down from Galilee to Bethlehem. To get from Bethlehem to the Temple Mount was nothing. And to be here in person and to have made that trip puts that in perspective.
And I think also you get an appreciation for not only distance, but altitude. One of my favorite verses in the Bible is from Luke chapter 19, in which it says, and Jesus, after finishing his conversation with people in Jericho, it says he went up to Jerusalem. Well, what does that mean? It's a simple phrase, but what we learn is just within that 15 miles, you go up nearly 3,500 feet in elevation. Your ears are popping and all kinds of things as you go up the hill. It gives you a great appreciation for exactly what Jesus went through as he went up the mountain.
The historian Luke records for us over in chapter 2, when the time came for the purification according to the law of Moses, they brought Jesus up to Jerusalem to present him to the Lord. As it is written in the law of the Lord, every male who first opens the womb shall be called holy to the Lord. Now, we are standing right next to the Temple Mount on a Herodian, a first century road. This is the area that they would have come to present Jesus.
They would have come to Jerusalem to present Jesus in the temple.
So they've come down from Galilee because of the census. They stop in Bethlehem. Mary gives birth there. And then they bring Jesus to the Temple Mount. And we're standing in the shade of the Temple Mount right now. So this is a totally different feel than what they were used to back home up in Galilee. A slower pace, it would have been more calm, more rustic, fewer people. And then they come to the hustle and bustle of Jerusalem.
And this would really be the big city. I mean, they have really come to the big city. Up in Galilee, you have farms and you have, of course, the lake and all the serenity that's up there. But when they came here, this would have been an eye-opening experience for any of the Jewish people coming from the north.
And we know that they made annual trips down to Jerusalem, but this would have been a special trip.
It would have been for the family, yes.
You know, the birth of their firstborn. They're coming to the temple to dedicate their son. They would have been purchasing some small turtle doves or something from the shops along the way here. How do we know that this is a first century road? What identifies it as that?
Well, this road was uncovered by archaeologists about just a couple of decades ago. This road is very typical of roads of that time. It has the same look and feel that other Herodian roads do. As you'll notice, there are some holes in the road. That is caused for two reasons. One is it's 2,000 years old.
Okay.
And so it is just sunk in a little bit. And the other has to do with all these big boulders that are here behind us. We know that in 70 AD, the Romans destroyed the city of Jerusalem. And when they did, they burned the temple and burned a lot of the things up there. In doing so, they pushed a number of the rocks off the Temple Mount, and they landed on this road, and that caused a lot of damage to this road
they're
as well.
huge. I mean, those aren't even potholes. I mean, you could fit a car inside of some of those.
Large holes.
Now, when they uncovered the road several decades ago, to help us understand the size and the weight of those stones, they left the street the way it was.
They did. And it helps us to appreciate just how destructive the Romans were to this city at that time.
There are layers of history to walking on this first century street. We have rubble from the destruction of the Temple Mount in 70 AD by the Romans. To the side, you see the shops. It helps you visualize what was going on around the Temple Mount. And of course, we know that Jesus was frustrated by that when he went there as an adult. The pavement, the stone pavers are huge. They're huge. I mean, everything that Herod did was on such a massive scale. And to see the finesse and the beauty and the scale and just everything was overwhelming.
Being able to walk on that Herodian street, knowing it's the exact same street that many people in the first century would have walked on, that's just awe-inspiring, because you realize that you're walking through history.
And when we're there, Barry's trying to reconstruct things for us. So while we're looking at the wall and see just a few stones jutting out of it, he's trying to explain there was this arch that came out, and then there were some steps that led down to it. And so he's trying to fill in the gaps, and you're trying to picture in your mind's eye what this looked like complete. And he does a great job at that. To get the idea of the magnitude of what we're looking at, there is a rock in that wall under the ground. You can go see that. It's over 500 tons heavy, 45 feet long, and you can see other stones a little bit smaller than that, but still hundreds of tons, and they make up the blocks of this western wall of the temple. And so as you're walking along this first century Herodian street, Mary and Joseph would have been seeing that. You know, it was a source of pride for the Jews to have such a glorious Temple Mount. When we look at the Temple Mount, when we look at the shops and the stones that make up those structures, there's something unique that makes them Herodian as well too. What is that?
King Herod not only built big things, he wanted to make sure it looked good. And if you'll look at a lot of the stones here on the Temple Mount and the Western Wall, and even on these shops behind us, not only are they perfectly cut and perfectly set in place, but they all have little etching around them.
I mean, some of the things that people have pointed out is that you can't even slip a piece of paper. Even now, 2,000 years later, you can't fit a piece of paper into some of those cracks.
That's correct. Each one of these stones was specifically cut for the position it's located.
So that's amazing from a design, engineering, architectural standpoint, that they were able to do something so refined 2,000 years ago.
That's right. Many of these stones were cut from quarries a few miles north of Jerusalem. So it's not even like they were cutting the stones here and could compare them. They had to cut them up there and then bring them down and then chisel them into place to make sure they're exactly the right side, then slide them in.
So coming from Bethlehem, they would have walked down this Herodian first century street. They would have gone around the corner here to the first century steps and entered the Temple Mount that way to present him to the Lord.
That's exactly right.
It would have been a lifetime moment for them. That would have stuck with them for the rest of their lives. I remember how excited I was at the birth of every single one of my children. And I remember how excited I was to introduce them to family. This is their name. Everything that went along with introducing a new life, a new family member. And to stand on that Herodian street at this immense moment for this young couple, this birth of this extra special child that Joseph has chosen to take on as his own, and to think about going there to dedicate him, just as a father, I think about it from that perspective. And being there on the Herodian street really helped me do that. In this episode of Following the Messiah, we've been to several different places talking about the birth of Jesus. We've talked about Mary and Joseph coming down for the census. They go to Bethlehem. We went to the Church of the Nativity. We went over to the Temple Mount to talk about his dedication. There's something else that we need to focus in on, though. In Luke chapter 1, Luke records for us the announcement of the birth of John the Baptist to his father Zechariah. In that same chapter, the announcement to Mary of the birth of Jesus to his mother. And in both of those instances, each of the parents responds in a similar way. Each one is shocked by the angel appearing to them. Each one is afraid. The angel encourages each one to not be afraid, but to believe and to respond. Zechariah did not, but Mary did. The challenge for us is to figure out how we're going to respond to the birth of Jesus. Are we going to trust the gospel accounts? Are we going to trust them as reliable? Are we going to choose to believe in the miraculous birth of Jesus or not? We hope that during this episode, we've helped to increase the possibility that you too would choose to believe in the Gospels and in the miraculous birth of Jesus.